Okay, well, maybe we should just go ahead and get started. I had, is there somebody who's on from the Water Resource Center? Doesn't look like it. All right. Well, want to welcome everyone to this presentation, kind of sponsored by the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission Water Resources Center on the SolSmart program. This is the first of a couple of different presentations and webinars we're offering in conjunction with the Water Resource Center on solar energy. The first one is going to focus on the SolSmart program, which is a national program that I'll describe in some detail to help communities become solar ready and to provide technical assistance to communities who are trying to implement solar, implement solar based upon their community's priorities as the solar industry ramps up. I'm Brian Ross. I'm with the Great Plains Institute. And I'll be running this particular webinar. I'm going to ask if people can, just for my benefit, if you can change your in your Zoom name, if you could put the organization that you represent. I would run through and have everybody introduce themselves, except that it might take up more time because we have enough people on the call that it would take some time. So you would change, if you can change your name to include your organization, that would be good. As I'm going to do right now. All right, there, I'm Brian Ross from the Great Plains Institute. Thank you for doing that, and I'll go ahead and proceed now. I will welcome any questions along the way. I believe we have, Rebecca, we just put them in the chat. Is that the best way to do it?
Yep, that's the preferred way.
Okay, and I will pause a couple of times in the presentation and ask for questions if people want to speak up. And you can just raise your hand, and Rebecca and I will take a look and see who wants to ask a question. If you let's see, in Zoom, where do you go to raise your hand? You know, it's
yes, there's a little button that says reactions, and if you click on that on the bottom of your screen,
there you go.
A little raise hand icon will appear.
Yeah, so yeah, it's different in every one of these platforms. So in Zoom, if you go to the reactions button, you will be able to raise your hand. Oh, here's Aaron. Aaron is on now. Aaron, I was getting started. I was hoping you would do an introduction. Do you want to do that now?
Hi, I don't know if you can see me or not. I don't know how this is working.
Yes.
I'm having technical difficulties. That's why I'm late logging on. But yeah, thank you so much to the Institute for doing this program, this webinar for us today. It's really an exciting topic. The Water Resource Center is instrumental in bringing new topics to help our municipalities out in the region, move forward with new technologies and to protect our water quality, and also, help our region become more resilient in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted to say thanks. And if you have topic ideas for the future, please let me know. All my contact information can be found at spcwater.org. So I'd be happy to have conversations with y'all. So I won't take up any more of your time. I'm sure there's a lot of content to cover. So thank you again.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Sorry for stumbling through the introduction there, but I knew Aaron would have something to contribute there. Okay, well, let's go ahead and proceed. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or I will pause occasionally and you can raise your hand. So just a brief introduction of me. Again, I'm Brian Ross. The Great Plains Institute is a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Minneapolis, but we work regionally and nationally on a variety of different issues, really about transforming our energy system to benefit economy and environment. And what that really means is what we're working on now is we're working to decarbonize our energy system nationally. We do this across a variety of different fronts. I'm the vice president of renewable energy, and I also work at the local government level to kind of help local governments become a vector for change. But we do a variety of other things, including working more on a policy basis to decarbonize our electricity production, working on transportation issues such as decarbonizing transportation, working on EVs and biofuels, and also on carbon capture and storage, where we work with the fossil fuel industry and large industrial users to decarbonize their fuels and their industrial processes so that we can get to all aspects of society and our energy use. The agenda for today is to kind of give a brief introduction about Pennsylvania's energy future and community planning. So what does it mean at the community scale to think about how we're transforming our energy system and some of the specific Pennsylvania issues that we've at least seen. I don't claim to be an expert in Pennsylvania, but we do have some Pennsylvania specific information we'll put forward. Then I want to talk about the SolSmart program generally and explain what it is and why this might be of interest to you guys. We'll talk about the designation structure, the program details, and the technical assistance that's available through SolSmart to local governments who are trying to figure out how to incorporate solar into their communities and address the growing solar development that they're seeing. And we have some kind of community planning and zoning examples that we'll talk about a little bit to get to the land use issues. And I am going to do a little bit of focus on large scale solar here, even though the SolSmart program addresses both small scale and large scale. But I will give a little bit more emphasis on the large scale because my understanding is that's more where the audience here is interested in. So first, I'll give a summary of what it is I'm going to say, and so in case I lose you along the way, you really only have to remember this slide. The transition that we're seeing nationally to a clean energy system is really rapidly accelerating. This is something that is largely market driven. It is well on its way. It is in some ways almost irrespective of policy now. And I'll explain that in a few additional slides. The future clean energy system is going to be different from the historic system in that every community will be a host community. Now in Pennsylvania, of course, many communities in Pennsylvania are already host communities to the historic energy system in terms of the fossil fuel resources that are in the state and that you will find locally. But even if you didn't have those resources, the thing to remember is that every community is going to be a host community for the future energy system because the distribution of resources is national rather than located in a few parts of the country. The third point is that solar development is focused specifically on solar. Like all forms of development, presents at the local level both opportunities and potential risks. This is something that communities recognize and that we want to recognize explicitly. And one of the things that we try to do with the SolSmart program is help you navigate that, the kind of opportunities and the risks associated with solar development in such a way as that we can create a transparent and predictable future for the people in your community and the landowners in your community to incorporate solar development when they want to. And then finally, the National SolSmart program provides a pathway for host communities for the new energy system to enable solar development that is consistent with community priorities, resources, and development plans. We recognize that solar development is not the same in every community, and that different communities have different priorities. And this National SolSmart program provides direct technical assistance to help you navigate that as the industry ramps up. So I'm going to now spend a little bit of time talking about Pennsylvania's energy future and community planning and what that means. One of the things that we are hearing a lot of talk about, and you may come across this as seen as there's a number of historic fossil fuel focused energy communities in Pennsylvania, that there's a thing called the clean energy transition and frontline communities. And this looking backward to our historic energy system, a frontline community is a community that has historically hosted fossil fuel production or use. That could be in my state of Minnesota. We don't have fossil fuel resources, but we do have communities that host, for instance, coal-fired generating plants that have been there for a very long time and for which been a certain amount of economic infrastructure built up around that. As those assets are transitioning out, we need to think about what does that mean in terms of how we mitigate the impacts locally of transforming these historic fossil fuel economies and communities toward a clean energy future. But we also look forward in our frontline communities, because there are communities that have never hosted a portion of the clean energy or of the energy system and are now being asked to. We see a lot of communities that have solar resources, for instance, in different parts of the country, where they are being asked to host things like solar farms. This is a new land use. It is a new experience for many communities, and even some communities that have hosted fossil fuel resources are now facing this new land use, and how are they going to host it moving forward in a way that makes the most sense to their community. So we kind of have what we have in terms of a frontline community looking backward is how we recognize the transition with those communities and move toward a clean energy future. And then also looking forward, those communities that are now being asked to host the system, how we mitigate for the impacts to their community as well. So from a local level point of view, how do you plan for solar development? What does that mean? And why do you want to plan for it? The transition towards solar energy specifically is one that has been fairly rapid, and many people kind of wonder what has happened. And the simple answer is that the cost of solar energy, both the large scale solar farms as well as small scale kind of solar on the rooftop, has declined since in the last 10 years by over 80%, the cost of building and maintaining those systems. So there's been a huge cost decline, resulting in solar energy now being cost competitive in both the wholesale and the retail markets, virtually everywhere in the country. It used to be that we looked primarily down at for instance, the desert Southwest, where they have an extraordinary solar resource, and we said, that's where solar belongs. But with the cost declines, what we've discovered is that solar resources in communities across the nation can be economically captured and used, resulting in this cost competitiveness. As all that's adding up to predictions, the Department of Energy did their solar future study last year. They released it and predicted by 2050 we will have over 40 times the amount of installed solar capacity in our nation than we did just a year ago. So if you think that you've seen a lot of solar coming your way now, it's going to continue and it's going to accelerate. And as a consequence of that, we need to figure out how do we, as communities, address these issues. So we do work at the small scale on what we call the rooftop scale. And in every community in Pennsylvania has an economically viable rooftop solar reserve. Now, many communities in Pennsylvania are very aware of what an energy reserve is. It's a term that you've dealt with for a long time. it is a measurable and quantifiable energy resource, and typically applied to fossil resources such as coal, natural gas, and oil, but can equally be applied to solar. We can quantify and measure the solar reserves in every community. And what we typically see, and this is true in Pennsylvania as elsewhere, that rooftop solar reserves, looking at just the solar reserve that is on the rooftop of your buildings in your community, is going to be roughly equivalent to at least 25 to 30% of the total electric use in your community. And that's at the bottom level in older and dense communities. In suburban and rural communities, the rooftop solar reserve is equivalent to 40% to even 80% of community electric use. We've actually seen some places where we've measured this, because we do quantify this for some communities when they ask for it. And we've seen some that have the rooftop solar reserve that is actually in excess of 100% of the actual electric use in the community. A solar reserve, of course, is it does not mean that it is going to be developed. It is merely a measurement of economic value and opportunity. So there will be many roofs, of course, in your communities that will not ever host a solar array. And so that resource won't be captured for a variety of reasons. People will choose not to. There'll be financial barriers to doing it on a particular roof. There's an older roof that needs some structural, particularly we see this with flat roofs on commercial buildings that need structural modification before the solar array can go on. And as a consequence, it never gets done. But nevertheless, the solar reserve is there and is economic, and people in your community will want to do it. And we need to figure out how you proceed as a community to enabling that to happen. But on the larger scale, on the utility scale, there's also a energy reserve that you can measure. And every community, every county we'll look at in Pennsylvania here has an economically viable reserve for utility scale solar development. And that we have measured that the National Renewable Energy Lab provides us with a lot of really great modeling and measurements. And they actually have measured the technical potential of utility scale solar in every single county in the nation, which is what you mean here. The interesting thing about the Pennsylvania picture is, of course, because when you look at places where solar can't really go, like on steep slopes, or in protected natural areas, or in developed areas, obviously, where there's already houses and industrial development, on places like wetlands and unbuildable areas, you can't put solar. But even if you take all those out of the picture, there's still something left. Now, in Pennsylvania, as you can see, the color of these counties shows that most of the counties in Pennsylvania are at that very lowest level of potential gigawatt hours of production from utility scale solar. But the interesting thing is that if you add up the total across the entire state, the total solar energy reserve for utility scale solar alone is over 5 times the total electric energy use in the state. So even though the solar resource is much lower in Pennsylvania than you will see in other places, particularly even in my home state of Minnesota, where you have lots of agricultural relatively flat lands, and so lots of solar reserve, even compared to places like that, Pennsylvania could generate substantial amounts of its energy, electric energy use via utility scale solar. And we did actually kind of put in a blue line, as you can see in the southwest corner of that map, where we kind of marked out where the Southwest Pennsylvania Commission is located, the 10 counties, so you can kind of see specifically what your solar resources are.
Brian, really quickly, I'm going to jump in. There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
That's asking, when you're saying the word reserve, are you referring to potential?
Yes. Yeah, in the same way that you would talk about an oil reserve or a natural gas reserve, it is the measurable and quantifiable amount of energy that is recoverable, but it is a potential recovery, and it does depend on economic conditions. Obviously, as the as the for oil and gas, for instance, there were a lot of reserves that were really not touchable and weren't potential until we developed horizontal drilling and fracking techniques, right? And they became cost effective, and that opened up new reserves because of the economic changes in the industry that allowed places like North Dakota, the Bakken reserve there that we've known about for many decades, but it wasn't economic until the last decade. Well, the solar reserves are the same way. We know that they're there, but it wasn't until the cost of the technology declined to the point where they became economic that we actually started really legitimately to be able to call it an energy and economic potential reserve. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes,
So,
and there is, sorry, another question came in right now. It says, our municipality is located in the gray area of your map, the chimney of the Northwest Pennsylvania. What does that mean?
up here?
Yes.
Yeah, that.
I think I can answer that because I did make this map, and that is a body of water. The gray section is a body of water, but your state boundaries go there, which is why I included it.
Yes, yeah, that's one of those things. When you draw a state boundary, sometimes it extends into one of the Great Lakes in this case, and so that got included. Well, if we so the community you're talking about is in the county, probably right along the lake there, and that obviously you can see is actually has a little bit better because of it's a little flatter there than in other parts of Pennsylvania. It has a better solar resource. So anyway, we'll touch on kind of what we're seeing now in Pennsylvania in terms of proposed development. Because this resource is now economic, and because there are people demanding, there's more demand than there is supply for solar electricity. There is a lot of developers who are trying to put projects on the ground, and there is in order to do a utility scale project, you have to interconnect to the transmission grid. And in order to interconnect to the transmission grid, you need to put in an application and pay a fee in order to be evaluated for that interconnection process. And it is a public record of who has gotten into the interconnection queue, as we call it. And right now, Pennsylvania has, I checked this yesterday, about 8,500 megawatts worth of proposed large-scale solar projects. And the connection queue in Pennsylvania, which is something called PJM, actually measures this in a couple of ways. And there is depending on how you measure it, that number could increase. But the point being that this amount of this number and capacity of projects, 8,500 megawatts, is 10 times the amount of existing solar that has been deployed in the state, which is around 900 megawatts. So there is right now in the market, people asking for a lot of solar development. Now, most of these projects will not go forward for various reasons, and I can go into great detail of why that would be, but it is an indicator of the market demand, is what the queue is. There's a lot of demand for solar. There's a lot of potential off-takers for the solar energy, and a lot of developers who are trying to take advantage of that. It's the same thing as it would be for any other kind of development, such as a housing development, where there's a large demand for housing in a metropolitan area. There's a lot of developers who are trying to help meet that demand. And that's the same dynamic that we're seeing here nationally, including in Pennsylvania. We did look at specifically what the queue says about projects that are in your 10-county region here. And there is a roughly 2,800 megawatts, and I realized that I used a different figure. It looks like that's a quarter of the total state. It's actually less than that. But there's roughly 2,800 megawatts of solar projects that are proposed just in your service territory, your 10 county. This would translate, if they were all developed, and they won't be, but if they were all developed, that market demand was met, it would be about 25,000 acres of land. Actually, I have a more precise figure. It's a little bit lower than that on the next slide. That doesn't, however, mean 25,000 acres is a lot of acres. However, it is a fairly tiny portion of the total land area, obviously, in your counties. Whoops. My slide is bouncing around a little bit. Here, I actually broke it out by county, so you can kind of see what it is. And actually, the acres is more like 22,500. But that is distributed across all 10 of your counties, some of which only have, for instance, Butler County or Beaver County and Butler County have less than 100 megawatts of proposed projects, while we see as much as almost 900 megawatts of projects in Lawrence County, and then several hundred in several of your other counties that have been proposed. So I'm going to pause here and see if, before I go on to the description of the SOLAR program, about the context of what we have, what I just went over in Pennsylvania. We've already had a couple questions, so I want to give a chance if people want to raise their hand or put something in the chat. We'll answer some questions here. Okay, if there aren't any questions, then I will go on and talk about what is SolSmart.
Brian, one just popped up into the chat. It
Okay.
says, is existing energy infrastructure, for example, from power plants, taken into consideration when assessing the feasibility of utility solar?
Very good question. It is the answer is yes. And that happens in two ways. One is that the people who are asking to interconnect to the grid, the process of interconnection is that they have to go do an engineering study on whether or not there is capacity on the grid for the new generation. And right now, it's a big controversy in the PJM grid, because there are so many solar and wind energy projects that have been proposed that the PJM grid is overwhelmed with requests. And they've actually asked for a moratorium, if you will, on new projects so that they can sort through the ones that they have. But all that is the engineering process, where you look at the existing kind of power plants on the grid, and then you look at whether or not there's capacity and what kind of improvements need to be made to the grid in order to interconnect. Now, the second way that is addressed is that there are power plants that are actually retiring. And we've seen a large number of coal-fired power plants retire in the last 10 years, and more are forecast and planned for retirement going into the future. One of the interesting things we've seen is that when a coal plant retires, or any kind of plant retires, that opens up interconnection opportunities on the grid. And so what we have seen is wind and solar developers are chasing interconnection opportunities. When a power plant closes, there's an existing interconnection point there. We want to come in and use it, and we'll build the solar around the area where the former power plant is now, and we'll transition that over to solar, or in some cases wind. So it is something that the existing power plant kind of interconnection kind of has a big impact on how solar development occurs.
And then
Rebecca?
there's two more questions that just popped up. The
Okay.
first one being, are there similar estimates of reserves for the middle portion of Pennsylvania within the Chesapeake Bay watershed?
Yes, well, I didn't do that separately, but we could. We have that information. It's broken out by county, so we can actually get the totals by county, and something that I'd be happy to pass on information. The queue does change fairly frequently as projects come in and out, so you do have to check it. I've seen ramp ups in the queue numbers, in a single kind of 6-month period go from low to high, and similarly from high to low as projects come in and out. But the numbers are actually pretty easy to access, and if you it's something that we might be able to give you a hand with if you wanted to take a look at that for a different part of the state.
And then the next question is, any advice on how a county with closing plants could prepare to market themselves to these utility solar developers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. There are some opportunities probably to do that. Usually what we find is the solar developers kind of swoop in on their own and take advantage of those opportunities. It does depend, of course, on what kind of land you have around the power plant, whether or not there's enough suitable land for development in order to put in a utility scale solar. You do need for, power plants are centralized power plants are very dense energy. And so you can have a 1,000 megawatt power plant that sits on a, it's big, but it's a relatively small portion of land compared to a low density use like solar, where for 100 megawatts of solar, you're going to need somewhere between 600 and 1,000 acres of land. So if you wanted to replace 1,000 megawatts of capacity at your power plant, you'd need an enormous amount of land. But it is still an opportunity, and at something like 100 megawatts, you are to a scale where a solar developer should be interested in it. So that would be something that would be a very interesting process to look ahead and see kind of whether or not to talk to the industry about whether or not there were opportunities if the community were interested in seeing something like this come in. This is something that we can that would be an interesting project for SolSmart to do if you wanted to kind of enter the SolSmart program and investigate that particular opportunity. Okay, I'm gonna move on, and if there's additional questions, I'll come back to them if we have time. I do want to get to the rest of the presentation at this point. Great questions, though. So what is SolSmart? SolSmart is a national designation and technical assistance program that's focused on local governments. The intent of SolSmart is to make it a smooth, transparent, and predictable process for residents, businesses, and landowners to develop their solar resources. A SolSmart designated community is one that has taken key steps to address local barriers, whether they be inadvertent or deliberate, to the solar energy development, and does kind of demonstrate a community is open for solar business. So maybe this goes to the power plant question that we just heard. It is a targeted, no-cost technical assistance program. There's no cost to the community other than the time that you want to put into it. I have to put in the disclaimer here. This is a National Department of Energy funded program. It's been around for 5 years. It has been refunded by the Department of Energy for another 5 years, so it's not going to go away, and is one of the Department of Energy's major outreach and assistance efforts to local governments to provide assistance on that solar transition. The intent of SolSmart in terms of the actions that we help communities with are to increase the transparency of the development process on everything from developing a permitting checklist and a solar landing page for your rents to doing figuring out how to do solar development on your city hall or your public spaces, or to figure out where to enable or not enable solar development at the utility or community scale in your on your areas that have solar resources and are currently in agriculture or some other kinds of use. We try to increase understanding on both from the staff level and the community level on how to remove barriers and implement best practices for solar photovoltaics, and to reduce some of the barriers, particularly as it relates in the utility or in the rooftop area, on things like permit turnaround time or zoning issues that can affect either rooftop or utility scale processes. So that's kind of what SolSmart's trying to do. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over the designation structure and the program details and the technical assistance that's available. SolSmart designates communities at 3 different levels: bronze, silver, and gold. Obviously, the bronze level requires you to do less, and the gold level requires communities to do quite a bit. And the kind of point systems are down there on that actual designation occurs. The bronze level is really just a matter of meeting mostly the prerequisites and then a few other things that the community needs to do in order to be able to say that you've removed most of the barriers. Bronze is really about removing barriers to solar rather than kind of encouraging solar to occur. If you wanted to take steps that would actually encourage solar, you would move up to the silver or the gold level in terms of taking additional steps and implementing additional best practices. The core competencies that are in the program are in 5 different categories, and you see them listed down below there. The foundational categories of permitting, inspection, and planning and zoning, and then special focus categories on government operations, community engagement, and market development. So if, for instance, the example we just heard of, if somebody wanted to promote their opportunity to interconnect solar at a power plant that was closing, that would be kind of market development activity that would be undertaken in that case. And this was a slide that I meant to change and I didn't. This is showing Connecticut. We do have a number of communities in Pennsylvania that have been certified already, and some active involvement by some of your Pennsylvania community organizations, in particular Sustainable Pennsylvania and Sustainable Pittsburgh, are 2 organizations that we are working directly with and that are working directly with the National SolSmart program to help people get involved in the program. But nationally, we have, and it says here 424, but we've had a slew of them come in the last couple of weeks. It's probably more like 440 or 445 designated communities thus far in the nation. And the technical assistance that is available to communities includes both kind of written materials that are on the SolSmart website, which you can access even if you're not part of the program. So it's very open. You don't have to join the program if all you want to do is take a look at, for instance, some of the best practices that have been published or even recommended in the program on the website. There is a program guide that is highlighted here that explains both the program and the designation process, as well as provides a fair amount of detail on each one of the best practices that have been recommended. What you get with the technical assistance, however, is that a technical service technical assistance provider with national expertise will work directly with your community on the issues that you want to have addressed in your community regarding solar. For instance, the Great Plains Institute has done a great deal of work. I'm a land use planner by training, and so I've done a great deal of work on zoning issues and land use planning issues around solar. And I'm going to touch on some of those things that we've done and examples that we've provided to communities in just a couple of minutes. But we also have people who are on the national assistance team who are technical experts in things like electric permits and building permits. We have experts on things like financing and how do you run a program that can take advantage of bulk purchasing on behalf of your community, or addressing particular barriers such as the interaction, and I'm going to touch on this one, between large-scale solar and some of your ecosystem services and natural resources that might be in your community. So technical assistance requires you to sign up. If all you want to do is look at the best practices and refer to them, you can just go to the website and take a look. If you do want to sign up, I'll put in the call here as well as I will in a couple of minutes. Great Plains Institute can help you get signed up and provide direct assistance to that process. It's actually a fairly low bar to sign up. You really only have to your community has to endorse a solar statement, as we call it, and it doesn't have to be the city council that does it. It can actually be a staff person with appropriate authority who can sign up for the program. Some communities choose to go through a city council endorsement process. But there is also assistance being provided, as I noted earlier, by Sustainable Pittsburgh and Sustainable Pennsylvania as an organization who will help you through that application process and get you into the program and get you lined up for technical assistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the best practices and community planning examples. I want to pause in case there's any specific questions about the SolSmart program itself.
Brian, there is one question in the chat. Do you know off the top of your head what Southwest Pennsylvania communities are SolSmart cities?
Oh, which ones? Which of the Southwest communities are? I actually don't know that off the top of my head. We could find that out, however. I believe that there are at least a couple in the Southwest part of the state that have become designated or are on the process toward designation. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Pennsylvania does have some existing resources that are actually outside the SolSmart program, or I should say, we're not directly part of the SolSmart program, although I will say that the one that's listed here, which is the Renewable Energy Ordinance Framework that was developed by the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, actually was done, my understanding is that it was done in conjunction with the SolSmart program. The DVRPC was a technical service provider for the communities in their region under the SolSmart program a couple of years ago. They actually did develop some of these resources, and I believe this framework was developed in 2016, which is right at the start of the SolSmart program, but was some very good work that was done and is available to communities there. There's also a number of model solar ordinances that have been developed by counties or other organizations in Pennsylvania. This one is one I put up as an example. It was done under an earlier DOE program called the Rooftop Solar Challenge. Penn Future was funded to develop a solar model ordinance. I did take a look at some of these model ordinances, and some of them are a bit outdated. But nevertheless, they do provide some level of guidance for communities. And I didn't want to list them all because there were actually several other ones that were developed, I believe, by counties for the benefit of their jurisdictions that were within the counties. And then there is a new national resource that was just developed by the National American Planning Association in conjunction with the with ICMA, the International City County Management Association. Called Solar at Scale. It's a local government guidebook for improving large-scale solar development outcomes. So it's focused explicitly on the large-scale solar development that we're seeing growing rapidly throughout the nation. And it is free of charge at the National American Planning Association website. So I wanted to kind of show some of the things in terms of land use planning that we do talk about in SolSmart. And in these other resource documents as well. We have come up with, for instance, a list of zoning best practices for small scale solar, small scale being things that are kind of rooftop or backyard or in a commercial buildings, yard or institutions, a campus. And it includes a number of different things like how do you define terms? How do you actually ensure that you have a by right allowance for accessory uses, solar accessory uses, and how you address things like height standards, aesthetic requirements that might be in your ordinance already, dealing with both rooftop and ground mounted systems, and then some of the kind of zoning, basic zoning techniques, lot coverage, setbacks, dimensional standards, and things like that, as well as a few issues that frequently come up like glare, or regulating how you regulate solar impacts in your community. So we have some best practices. I'm not going to go through these. I do have a whole presentation that I do on zoning and planning that if you're interested, we could put together. We also have a zoning set of best practices for large-scale solar that similarly has some of the same things, such as defining terms and enabling development. In this case, it's not a by right development, probably more of a conditional or interim use or special use, depending on the term that you use in your community. But also some unique things that go with kind of large-scale solar, such as capturing co-benefits, which is a really critical and important element that I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail here, and that gets to the water quality issues that I know people on the call are particularly interested in hearing about. Those large-scale siting elements, which I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, include understanding the difference between the different scales of solar. We generally talk about community scale and large scale. Community scale is something that that fits within the context of the community. And in some communities, that's going to mean a 1 acre development, and in some communities that will mean 20 or 30 or 40 acres. But it is something that given the kind of land use characteristics you have in your community, can usually be done by a single landowner and development. That's a community scale solar project. Large scale solar, in contrast, is something that usually something where you have to do land assembly in a place like Pennsylvania, where there is it's multiple landowners. It may be it will get not only to hundreds of acres, but possibly thousands of acres of projects. It's a little bit more difficult to do in Pennsylvania, given your topography and your land covers, to get a multi-thousand acre development in place. Although you do see a few of those. In places like we're working in the state of Indiana, which is of course relatively flat, and they actually have a proposal that is currently moving ahead that's been approved. It is appropriately named the Mammoth Solar Project, and it will occupy the project area, not the array area, but the project area where it's going to be scattered across a landscape is over 10,000 acres. So there's a lot of different scales, and it's important for you to distinguish kind of the community from the large scale. There's also site design elements that you need to incorporate. Things like setbacks, screening are elements that probably most people will think about, and there are best practices associated with that we would recommend. Things that allow for the goal of, for instance, screening a development to occur without putting an inordinate amount of burden on the developer or the landowner who wants to develop their solar resource. And then there's other elements and nuances. How do you deal with power and communication lines going large scale development? What kind of fencing do you need to see around the development? And then kind of one of the critical areas that you guys who are more water quality oriented, ground cover and buffer areas. What do you need to do? How do you deal with that? We have some examples, and this one is actually from the Indiana model ordinance that we helped develop for that state, that talks about ground cover and buffer areas. What you want to see as a community to ensure that your community is going to benefit from this development. This is called site design for co-benefits. It's not just about renewable energy production, but it's also about what the community is going to get from it. Avoiding large-scale removal of mature trees is something that is frequently seen, and in a place like Pennsylvania, where you have forested areas, is something that comes up not infrequently, as well as in some of the other East Coast states that we've seen. And how you address that in your community is something that you need to address in your ordinance. Requiring some kind of a vegetative management plan to be submitted by a qualified professional that's going to address the kind of co-benefits of ground cover, whether or not you want to create habitat. Where this picture here is a picture of pollinator habitat at a site in Minnesota. And we're seeing this done across the nation now, where solar arrays can be designed so that this kind of habitat can be incorporated around and even underneath the panels. And there's an added benefit to that in that it dramatically increases the infiltration of stormwater on the site such that in some circumstances, you can actually create a green infrastructure amenity for water quality in your community. But this kind of provides some direct language for co-benefits on that issue that we've incorporated into our model ordinance. And we also have in our model ordinances some kind of guidance that explains the language so that you can kind of see how this language may work in your communities, or it may need to be modified to address something, but kind of gets to the goal of why you would include a language include that kind of a language as a requirement in your ordinance for large-scale solar. We are similarly seeing some concerns at the community scale about the interaction of solar and agriculture. And so there's a number of different best practices that we're coming up with and things that you can consider. And this is just a kind of a bundle of options that have been used in different communities to mitigate for the kind of agricultural impact, the impact to agriculture, I should say, at the local level, consistent with communities that have designated agriculture as an area to protect in their community. Not all communities are concerned about agricultural protection and haven't and put it in their communities, but we have seen this in a number of communities, and there's guidance as well in the model ordinance about what you're trying to get to and when you would actually apply language like this in a development ordinance. And what this all gets to is kind of promoting what we call the co-benefit approach to solar development, and what that means is that there's a lengthy explanation and very technical definitions of what co-benefits are. But what it means is that if you restore watershed function or you diversify your agricultural base, if you find a way to enhance habitat in your community consistent with community goals, or you protect your drinking water supplies by eliminating nitrate vectors for contamination, which is we see in the Midwest a lot. Does it matter if it's a solar farm? The solar farm, if your goal is to protect your drinking water supply from nitrate contamination, and you're able to do that, the fact that it's a solar farm is almost secondary. So the co-benefits sometimes are things that are almost more important to the community than the clean energy generation that you would see. And there are obviously co-benefits on the economic side of this as well in terms of tax base creation, job creation, et cetera. I just want to kind of mention quickly the project that we're working on specifically on water quality, which is called the Photovoltaic Stormwater Management Research and Testing Program, or PVSmart, that we've been working on for almost 3 years now, where we are developing, doing science-based measurements of stormwater impacts under different kinds of circumstances and different hydrologic and soil conditions across the nation, and coming up with stormwater runoff coefficients that are specific to solar development. We will be publishing those runoff coefficients sometime this year, probably in June or July. But in the meantime, we have actually come up with a set of best practices for regulators and solar projects that they could consider based upon the interim findings that we had from our research and our modeling. And here's just some examples of things that we recommend for regulators, such as using solar-specific best practices. For instance, recognizing that final stabilization standards under your construction general permit may be discouraging inadvertently the use of native and pollinator-friendly habitat and ground cover. And Pennsylvania is actually a leader in the nation of addressing this at the statewide level in their construction general permit. If you go to the most current guidance in Pennsylvania issued by your Department of Environmental Protection, if I got that department right, encouraging optimal water quality outcomes in your stormwater and water quality regulation, recognizing that you can actually exceed the minimum standards and create a water quality amenity, and striving for cross-jurisdictional consistency by training local officials who are implementing these things so that we have some consistency and good best practices in place. And for the solar developers, we actually also came up with some solar project best practices. And I'm not going to go through all these because I want to save some time for final questions. And I realize that I have at a couple of examples of communities in SolSmart that have taken specific examples in terms of getting to designation. I was Morris, Minnesota is a community that we worked with to get SolSmart Silver designation. So they're exceeding the minimums that included a zoning ordinance that establishes a clear regulatory pathway, last bullet point there, for primary use solar, which is solar farms and gardens. And then similarly, Lynn, Iowa has been a SolSmart Gold community, and they similarly addressed proactively how to incorporate local co-benefits into their solar development at the solar farm level. And they did that in advance of any proposal coming through, which was very beneficial to them because they now have two proposals that have come forward in the last year, one of which is an 800-acre project, and the other one is a 4,000-acre project that is around a closed nuclear plant. So they had a plant, it closed, and now the interconnection point is going to be utilized by a very, very large solar array that actually straddles the Cedar River on both sides of it. And so they have some real water quality issues, water quality opportunities, as well as concerns that they need to have addressed. And they had fortuitously put this into place before that occurred. So here is our contact information on how to become a SolSmart community, several different ways, but you can certainly contact us as well as Sustainable Pennsylvania. And that's where I'll close it and see if we have any last questions.
Brian, there is one question in the chat that says, are the services different that are available to counties compared to cities?
Oh, good question. Counties and cities and even townships can be certified as solar ready. In fact, regional governments such as the Southwest Pennsylvania Commission can also be certified as solar ready. There are different pathways for all of those entities. Counties, and it does depend on the kind of land use authority that you have, as well as the permitting authority in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a little bit complicated on the permitting side, and we've been kind of navigating that with our colleagues at Sustainable Pennsylvania. But that will of course not probably be a county issue, but there is a separate pathway called a modified pathway that the counties take because it's designed a little bit more for the authorities they have and the role they play as a convener and an educational and information provider to their jurisdictions which are in the county, even if they don't have authority, such as land use authority over those jurisdictional areas. So the counties have more of an educational role to play in some cases than they do a changing the zoning ordinance themselves kind of role. So there are all those different kinds of jurisdictions are eligible for certification, and they have pathways that have been designed specifically for them within the SolSmart program. So is that it, Rebecca, on the questions that have been posted?
Yes, there are some people asking about the presentation, and maybe Aaron, would you be able to speak to, I think Brian and I are more than happy to share this presentation out, but I'm not sure, Aaron, how you're planning.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No, yeah, I mean, if you guys want to send the presentation out to folks that attended today, that's great. But I was planning on getting the video and the PowerPoint presentation from you and posting them on our website at spcwater.org under the past event pages. We're also having another presentation that Brian's going to be doing for us on April 20th, and that's going to be specifically on the PVSmart project that he mentioned briefly here at the end of the presentation. And that's going to be more on the large scale solar development, water quality risk, or green infrastructure. So again, that will be April 20th at noon as well. So. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to you guys, both Brian and Rebecca, for doing this for us. This is a lot of great information.
Okay, and Aaron, if somebody contacts you about entering the SolSmart program, you can refer them either to us or Jim Price at the Sustainable. I think he works both at Sustainable Pittsburgh and Sustainable Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And you know
Yeah.
Jim, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he can be the point person for anybody who wants to enter the program. Although people can contact us directly as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting us. We are only a couple minutes over, and that's good. And I'm looking forward to the presentation. I love talking about the water quality aspects of solar because we have really national best practices. It is a groundbreaking study that we're getting ready to complete, and a lot of valuable information for people dealing with water quality.
Yes, thank you again, Brian, and I look forward to seeing you on the 20th.
All right. Thank you.